Hello, welcome to Missionary Ramblings podcast. I'm Steve Hendricks, your host. Today, my guest is Bart Street. Bart is a friend of mine from Malden United Methodist Church. He's been on the Peru mission team, but we're going to talk about a bit of a different topic than we normally have. We're going to talk about some specific type of long-range planning or funding operations in the form of an endowment accounts. And Bart's going to answer some questions for that for us today. So thank you, Bart, for being with me. Want to tell everybody kind of who you are, what your background is?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate you inviting me on today. So I'm Bart Street. I'm a financial advisor with Maxworth Benefits Group here in Greenville. I've been doing this for 22 years now and work with individuals as well as companies, and we do have a focus in healthcare, but I do work with a lot of individuals here in the area. And how I guess I tie in here is at our church at Malden United Methodist Church. I'm the chairman of the Endowment Committee, and we set up an endowment, I guess, back in 2007, and that kind of led to our getting together for this podcast today.
All right. Great. So like I said before, normally I like to start off with a prayer before we really get into the discussion, because this is a Christian-based podcast. So let's do that now. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the time you give us, the chances and opportunities to help people understand the ways they can participate in your work in the world, and all the different ways that they can participate, not just physically or in presence, but also with stewardship and management as well. And so we're going to be praying that you kind of guide our conversation today, because there may be some people out there with some questions that we can answer. And hopefully we will shed some light on some things to help them understand some of the different ways they can do that. As always, we just thank you for the blessing of being able to do this, and pray that you lift up both Bart and myself and keep us on topic for what you want. Also, we pray in your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So let's kind of start off with the simplest question. What is an endowment fund?
So an endowment fund is a long-range way of providing for future needs. And I guess in simplest ways to explain it is you set an amount of money aside, you invest it, and you never spend the principal. The idea is that you just spend the interest or the growth that it spits out. And there's different ways to do it. Some are strict in the fact that they would only pay off what that investments had earned in the previous year. And then some, like ours, have a fixed percentage. So our the endowment that we have, the rule is that every year it will pay off 5% of the December 31st value from the previous year. And most years will grow by more than 5%. Some years it'll go down, but every year we're going to plan on a 5% distribution, and we don't think we'll ever eat into the principal, at least not more than 1 or 2 years at a time, and then we'll catch back up when the market's growing again.
Okay. So just to be clear with folks out there, you're specifically talking about the value at the end of the year, 5% of that, regardless of how it performed during the year. That's the distribution on yours. That's not always the count with every single one, is it? There are different levels sometimes.
There are. There's different ways that they can be done. And there might be some endowments that they will only pay a distribution if the endowment earned money in the previous year. Okay. That's not the way ours is set up. I think that's being a little bit too rigid, to be honest, because the needs don't go away in years where the market may not have performed. And so the way that we've set ours up, and it came through the when we looked at where we wanted to have our endowment invested, who we wanted to use, that was one of the criteria that we looked at to see, how flexible or inflexible are these. And we selected one that would create a distribution each and every year, even in the years when when the market may not have been up or our investments may not have been up. And then endowments can choose to be invested different ways. Most of them are invested with traditional investments like stocks, bonds, or mutual funds or ETFs, and that's the case with ours. You could have an endowment, invested with other things. They could be in CDs or something ultra secure or bonds, things like that. But most of your endowments are long-term in nature, and they want to take advantage of what has the chance to grow the most long-term. And for the most part, that is equities or stocks, and that's what the majority of our endowments invested in.
Okay. So one thing I'm picking up on here is that really and truly an endowment fund is better centered for a group that is thinking something that is going to need a recurring contribution for many years to come. It's not something like you're going to build a project and you need money until that project is built. You're talking about operational cost every single year in and year out for many years.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Steve. I would think an endowment would only be appropriate for an organization that has an expected lifespan of greater than 50 years. So they're very common with hospitals. They're very common with healthcare organizations, universities. Every university has an endowment. Well, maybe not every, but the vast majority of universities have endowments, and now a lot of churches do. A lot don't still, but most churches of the size of Malden United Methodist Church do have one. We felt like we might have even been a little bit late to the game as far as when we put ours in 2007. But I'm sure there are others just as big as us that don't have them yet, but probably are working that way.
You mentioned universities. This is another time I've mentioned a couple of times in some previous podcasts that we as Christians and Christian organizations sometimes need to look towards non-Christian organizations for what are good ideas. And I think when you talk about the ability to long-range finance and long-range funding, and especially when you're talking about a person's planning for after their death and things like that, universities are by far probably one of the go-getters, I believe, in that industry. They have excelled in this ability, I think.
So they are asking for these planned gifts, multiple times a year. They do a great job of asking for money from your estate, and that is not something that churches are very good at. When we formed the endowment committee, one of the things that one of our committee members brought to us was this book. It's by Cliff Christopher. It's called Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. And that had a pretty big impact on us. It talks about, and this book I think was written in 2006 or 2008. So, well, not 2008. We already we set it up in 2007. I think it was written in 2006. But it talks about the three distinct giving pockets that you would give from. So one of those pockets that you give to God through is your earned income, and that's what most of us think about when we think about tithing. That you give a tenth of your income through your earned income. But the other areas that kind of get neglected are the other two that he mentions in the book is capital, the capital pocket, and that's things like what we have as we're getting older. And this is where I'm spending most of my days helping people to build their capital. That's stocks, bonds, investments, mutual funds. For most people, their retirement plan, 401ks and IRAs and things like that. So that's an area that people can certainly utilize to gift. And then the third, and this is where we really want to focus our attention, is the estate. And it gives a statistic in there that says roughly, and this may have changed, but back when this book was written, it said about 1/3 of every dollar in the United States goes to a religious organization, is giving to your church, but yet only 1/10 of that, or only 1/10 of money that goes to endowments goes to churches or religious organizations. And So when you think about, we're getting a third of the money of people while they're alive, but we're only getting a tenth of that money as people die or pass along. It's just because we have not done a good enough job of promoting that and asking for that money. And that was something we wanted to change when we put the endowment in place years ago.
Since we're talking about estate planning, let's kind of go maybe through a short example of that and what people can do. And I'll use myself as an example in this case. I'm single. I have no kids. So when I pass along, there's nobody really to take any of the things I have built up. For example, my house. I own my house. So when it comes time for when I pass away, it would be a good plan for me to do an estate plan where I set aside the sale of the house money to go towards the church, correct? Because I don't have anybody to receive that money. And even if I was somebody who had kids and things like that, I could still set, okay, we're selling off property or things we own. 10% of everything, even from our death sales, would still go to the church, even though we may have kids to inherit everything. Those are all things that can be done in a planning setup and even put into a person's will.
Yeah, exactly. And it would need to be put into somebody's will if that's what they wanted to do. A lot of times people will do this as they redo their will. There may be, in retirement, people might, I think on average, they probably change their will 2 or 3 times in retirement. And so as people have learned that we have an endowment, we get feedback from time to time that, hey, we made plans, we've included the church and the endowment in our will. And so that's a good time to do it when you're changing things. But if you already have a will and you don't want to change things, it is easy to do that by adding a codicil, which is just a little add-on, an amendment to your will, so to speak. It says, oh, by the way, we would like to see 10% of our estate, or it could be a set dollar amount. We want to see $10,000 go to the Malden United Methodist Church endowment. And so really easy to do. We actually have an attorney at our church who said if somebody needs that done in their will, that they'd be willing to do that for them to help them with that codicil or that amendment if they wanted to plan for the church in their estate. So yeah, that's something that needs to be done through a will or a trust, however it's set up. Or the other way people can do it is they can name the church as a beneficiary. So a lot of times you have a beneficiary, not just with life insurance. Obviously, if you have life insurance policy, you can name whoever you'd like as beneficiaries there, but retirement plans almost always have beneficiaries. So 401ks, IRAs are the 2 most common. Annuities, all of those products have beneficiaries, and anything that has a beneficiary, I think is actually superior to things that don't, just in the fact that they avoid probate. They go straight to whoever you named as your beneficiary. They don't have to go through probate as anything that passes through your will does. And since they escape probate, they escape a little bit of the fees that go along with probate. So it's a more efficient way to pass things along if you have the opportunity to utilize a beneficiary to name where you want your proceeds to go.
And I would suggest at this time that anybody who's considering any of these type things to seek professional assistance in trying to set these up, but also talk to them about the potential tax issues. Inheritance tax is a pretty steep tax a lot of times, and you want to sometimes make these direct to your charity in a way to avoid leaving a loved one who you then ask to take money you've given them and donate it from being stuck with an inheritance tax situation sometimes. But obviously a professional in the field would be the one who gives you that advice, not me.
Yeah, well said, Steve. Yes, so seek professional help. Attorneys are the only ones that can draft wills and trusts, things like that, and CPAs for tax advice. I am neither of those things, and would certainly recommend people go to those types of professionals for that, and to seek out good advice. And yeah, if you want money to go to a charity, don't ask a child or a family member to do that. You need to make arrangements for that. Otherwise, you are going to mess them up potentially with taxes, and potentially have to pay taxes on money that they're not going to get, or that you don't want them to get. Of course, once it's in their hands, you really have no way to know that it gets where you want it to. So if you want it to go to a charity, then you need to make those arrangements ahead of time.
All right, great. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. What's the minimum amount to start an endowment fund if one has not been started already?
Yeah, different places will have different requirements. So the company that we utilize, they required $25,000 as their minimum to get things started. And I think that's a good place to start from. Without that much, it's probably not significant enough to make much of a difference. So I think that would be a good amount to shoot for, at 25,000. Now we have the ability, if somebody wants to name, we have just limited things that you can invest in our endowment, or limited things that you could direct your money towards, I should say. But if somebody had something that fell outside of that, we are willing to listen for a $25,000 minimum. Somebody can name something new that they want, as long as it's approved by the by the board and by the endowment committee. But the things that are already approved or put in place, and we specifically didn't want any really crazy things that might be hard to spend the money later on. So we try to keep it pretty broad. But the first thing that we look at is maintenance and improvement of the physical facilities of the church. And that would include the grounds, structures, fixtures, and equipment. There is the ability to invest for family activities programs for the youth, college scholarships, enrichment programs of MUMC, including, for illustration and not limited to, music, lecture, preaching activities, fine arts, library acquisitions, or similar programs. And then the one that we actually started this for, which is missions operated by Malden United Methodist Church. And then finally, programs developed to meet changing circumstances and needs of MUMC. So we left a catch-all there, but yeah, we started this thing with missions in mind, and I believe that is our largest payout each year, does go to support missions from our church.
And that's the specific one to our church. If somebody else was to come to you, not of our church, and we're trying to start one, those would not apply to them. That
Nope, they can make it whatever they want to be.
You talked a little bit about the fact that it's grounds and there's some facilities, things in there. One of the accounts we have is the cemetery fund. And I think that's a great one because we talked about it before. That's not something people tend to want to contribute to, is a cemetery, exactly. A fund to maintain your cemetery. And so setting up something that kind of takes that out of the need to specifically ask people for money and make it a yearly thing it's getting its contribution, makes it much easier for them to be able to maintain that cemetery, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're exactly right. It's not something people want to think at generally, and they're getting a pretty sizable distribution each year, which goes a long way towards paying those costs of maintaining the cemetery. I mean, that grass has got to be cut just about every week.
Fence has to be repaired regularly because people run into it all the time.
That's right.
And somebody who's wanting to start one up, this is something they need to think about. One of the best ways to start one sometimes are for things it's hard to raise funds for. Specifically, a lot of times we talk about this in the fundraising for our school projects and things like that. It's easy sometimes to get people to contribute to build a building, but to do the repairs on that building, that's a lot harder to get people a lot of times to contribute to. So looking at maintenance programs, utility funds, things like that, things that are hard to get people to put money towards on a regular basis are probably great things to start endowment accounts up for on long-term projects.
Yeah, I do. And one of the neat things we have, our committee gets to do each year is there is a board designated fund. It's kind of the catch-all that says, if somebody wanted to make a gift and they said, I want this just to go where it's most needed in any given year, that's what we try to do. And so if one of the other things that we mentioned doesn't really pull at their heartstrings, then they said, just use this money as it can best be used in any given year. And that's what we try to do. And so we are always looking to get recommendations or requests if there are people in the church that have a special need that has come up. And it may not be an annual need. And in fact, it usually isn't, but usually it's something that's special and that needs attention this year that may not need attention next year. And each year we get to make a recommendation to the board of how we think that should be done. And ultimately it's a board decision, but the endowment committee gets to make a recommendation towards that. And so good to spread the message that if people in the church or parts of the church have things that could use an influx of cash that's not on a regular basis, then let us know. We might be able to help out.
Yeah. And going back to the MUMC endowment funds, the one that goes towards mission, when I was chair of the missions committee, every year we set our budget typically October, November for the coming up year. And then about February, the bishop would come in with a special project that needed funding. And, it was never in our budget to fund that project. And instead of having to set a special amount in our budget that would then get questioned by those who didn't regularly deal with the bishop's special needs, the mission endowment fund, when that money comes in, that's a great way to sometimes work on those special things that come in after the budget is set and after it's declared, and they have some rules and guidelines for how to look at different things that are set up just within the church. But it's a great way for them to provide money after the budget is set to still be flexible enough to encourage other mission projects in the church.
Yeah. And our hope is that, that it does, this money does come in and it becomes regular and it can be counted on, and that each year we're going to expect it to be a little bit more than it was the year before, and so that we can do a little bit more and reach a little bit further than we did each year before.
All right. Back to a general question on these endowment funds. The money that goes into these accounts is supposed to be basically untouched, correct?
Correct.
Is there ever a situation where that money can be accessed above the 5%, or is it legally locked in?
It is 99% locked in, I would say. I talked to our provider because I remember we went through this, as we set it up. We asked all these questions and got all the answers, but 14 years later, your memory starts to fade a little bit. So I had them give me a refresher and say, how would that work? And who we go through, they're a large organization and they have a board of the charitable endowments there. And so if a organization were to become defunct, then they would, their board would make a recommendation as far as how to distribute those funds to the charities that the board would choose there. And they would all be, top-notch charities that would spend it well. And then the other part of that question is, well, what if we're really having financial difficulty and we need to get that money? You can petition that same board and ask them and put that to them, and then it would go before their board for them to rule as to whether or not that was a appropriate thing to happen or not. So it's not 100% black and white. There is the option to ask for that, but the idea is that you would never touch that money, that it's there forever.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you set this up, you don't want to touch it, but nobody can ever plan for every contingency or emergency. And if say like I set one up for the school in Tanzania, we set one up for school and there was an earthquake. It's on a fault line, and we had half our buildings destroyed. It may be a situation where we'd have to make that petition then to dip into that account to rebuild our school so that we would need the operating money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
otherwise
would
we
say
be defunct.
that would be something you'd keep in mind as you're, if you're looking to set up an endowment, that you begin with the end in mind, and with the thought that, what if this happens, and select an endowment or a provider that would have that type of flexibility if you thought it was needed. Now, you can set up an endowment if you've got the attorneys to draw up the correct paperwork, then you can set it up on your own. You can do the investing on your own. We wanted to use something that was more turnkey. And
Right.
so in
and I think most people would.
I would think so too. I wouldn't want to try to reinvent the wheel if I had.
Personally, I don't want to get into investments. That's for people who, like you, who work the field, and it's way too many things to try and keep track of. And yeah, so hopefully most people feel the same, but there may be a couple of adventurous people out there that want to get into that. And it's good to know that they could if they wanted to.
Yeah. One thing we had mentioned, but is worth mentioning is we outsource that as well, the investments, as far as who's choosing that. I don't know if some people might have thought that somebody like myself would choose that. Even though I'm a nerd when it comes to this type of stuff. I love investing, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it, but I want to outsource that as often as I possibly can. And that's what we did with the church too, to say, let's put it in the hands of professionals that are looking at it every day. And when they think they need to make a change, they don't ask us or say, hey, we think this or we think that. What do you think? We have turned that over to them to say, when you think you need to make a change, just do it. And they're investing our account the way that they're investing everybody else that selected the same risk profile that we selected. So we selected a growth risk profile, which is as aggressive as they will let us be. And so they're not just investing our account like that, they're investing everybody's account that way. And we're paying a little bit of an investment management fee for that, or an advisory fee, as it's sometimes referred to, just so people will know, and in full transparency, that is a rate that's probably about 0.9%, so about 0.9% per year. And then, the idea is that by them actively managing it, is what I tell people, and just in my personal practice, because it's the same way we utilize these types of portfolio managers all the time, is say, by turning it over to them, they're going to watch it every day. They're going to do better than if we just pick something and put it in investment and leave it there for years and years. So it's worth paying them, 0.9% or 1% or whatever it might be. It's worth it to pay them to do that. By them actively managing it and making those changes when they think they need to make it, we're going to more than make up for that 1% that we're paying over time, or in this case, 0.9%.
There was one thing you mentioned in that previous question I asked about. You hit on the fact of when somebody goes defunct, and the fact that it goes to an advisory board. I want to make sure we kind of get that clear for everybody. What we're talking about there is if you're probably doing a small group. For example, personally, I work with a very small group here in the U.S. who is funding the operations in Tanzania for the school. If I had set one up for them, there's always the chance that that organization, the leaders could die off, and there would be no more leadership for sending money directly to Tanzania. So it would become defunct. Less likely maybe in a church, though sometimes that happens. But there is an avenue by which that money will still be doing good. It just may be directed by the manager advisory board in that situation.
Right. And talking to, the organization that we used, they said that we could actually provide a letter of instruction to say, if this were to happen, in the event of us not, if we were no longer a going concern, then here's what we would like to see done. And then they, that same board would take that under advisement and say, so you could have, if there was a sister organization or another organization that had a similar mission, but might be a little bit more financially stable than your organization, then that would be an opportunity to provide that type of instruction for them. Say, if we can't continue, then we'd like to see it go here. And if they think that's a worthy organization, I bet they would do all they could to see it go there.
For example, if I set one up in my estate plan that goes towards operation budgets of the school, and then the organization goes defunct at some point in time, I could maybe have wording where they would look at redirecting it towards our church endowment fund, and that would be like a second choice or something like that.
Yeah.
So there is a possibility that could happen. They
There
would
is a
look at it.
possibility of that. Yeah, you'd have to, again, the board would make that decision, but yeah,
No
they let me know
guarantees,
that.
but
Yeah, no
a
guarantees,
possibility.
but a possibility. Yep.
Yeah. What are some of the major ways you think these type of funds are often started? Obviously, we've talked a little bit about estate planning and setting one up through estate planning.
Mhm.
But the one at our church, I don't want to mention names of who started it, but there was an individual who came to the church and kind of said he wanted to set one up. I don't remember the reason why he had a specific amount of money that he felt that was good to put into this, but he kind of started the fund for us. So a lot of people are like that. What are some other ways maybe that you think might?
Yeah, you would need some seed money for sure. Well, like I said, it took $25,000 at minimum to get started with the organization that we use. And like I said, I think you probably need that to make it worthwhile. We actually were able to start out with a little bit more. We went to the cemetery committee because, as you mentioned, they had an amount that kind of just sat on the balance sheet and said, hey, how about this? We could put it here and put your money to work for you. And they agreed. They thought that was a good idea. So we were able to add that to the initial gift that was going to be towards missions. And then another founder, I guess, of our is an amount of money that goes towards the support of our kindergarten at our church each year. So they also had some of that initial seed capital, I guess you could say. So yeah, and they get a nice distribution each year as well. But yeah, you can't really start one up counting on somebody to die to get it going. It has to be there in place.
That would have to be a personal decision as they do their estate.
That's right. I guess
universities, they have that ability going on all the time because they have such a big draw. A university does, especially when you're talking about an Auburn, a Georgia, Clemson, something like that. They have a huge alumni base from which they pull from. So
yeah, exactly right. But yeah, it takes a couple of donors that really want to get it going, I would think, to get something going at almost any organization. And you just got to get started. Once you're started, you can say, oh, hey, look what we have. And we've been able to go to the church membership and say, really just advertise, say, hey, we just want you to know that this exists and think about it when you're doing your estate planning. But if you'd like to contribute to it now, this is something that's going to be here forever. And so your money is going to a good cause that's not just going to work for the next month, like the regular budget in the church, but it's going to be here in perpetuity, and we'll magnify and further God's kingdom forever.
Now, 25,000 is the startup fee, but people can contribute to the fund, and it doesn't have to be that much, correct?
Any amount.
Yeah.
Any
so
amount you can.
After the fund is started, every so often people contribute to it, and it continues to grow. But it can be any amount. Like somebody could set it up where they do a birthday fundraiser, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah.
Anything like that. So, I mean, there are all kinds of opportunities to add funds to these endowment accounts. And after it's started, you no longer have to worry about having such a large amount of money to add. Now, obviously, you don't want to be $1 here, $1 there. You want to be, try and save it all up, then make your large contribution maybe. But it doesn't have to be 25,000 anymore.
No, hey, we'll take $1. If somebody's given a gift of $100,000 or $100 to the church, and they wanted to designate 10 of that to go to the endowment fund, that works just great. When we have people that kind of do something similar to that, and it grows a little bit because there are some some people at church that do make consistent, ongoing gifts to the endowment fund. They're not waiting to die to do it, but going ahead and giving a little bit now.
It's always good not to wait to die to do these things.
That's right.
Do them while you're alive.
But hey, it's already going to good causes. So
yeah,
if you've got if the organization that you want to support has an endowment, then they're already doing good things today and making distributions now and hopefully well into the future.
Right. One thing I remember that came up probably every time somebody thinks about one of these endowments, but I remember it coming up a little bit at our church. Some people were concerned about setting that much money aside and not just using the money itself. I think there were people who thought that if the money came in, let's go ahead and use it now today and spend it and not put it in an investment account. Especially in the church, you've got people going like, we're not supposed to be in the market, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
As a person who's kind of, in the industry, how would you approach that to try and explain to them what's going on?
Oh yeah. Well, that just makes me think about, being a financial planner, and you may sit down with a couple and one of them is a saver and one of them's a spender. And it's like, we don't need to save that money. We need this money now versus saving for retirement. And like, if you don't make yourself do it, then yeah, you'll spend whatever you have. Cash just has the tendency to evaporate and be spent. But it's just like being disciplined and saying, no, I'm going to make sure that we have a plan to save for retirement, and we're going to set X number of dollars aside to make sure that that we're taken care of in retirement. I heard something a while back that said the best person to take care of the old man that you're going to become is the young man that you are today. And I think that maybe applies with the endowment too, that if we don't feed this now and prepare for it and plan for it now, then it won't be there. And so, yeah, but hey, if people want to give to the church now versus in the future, I'm all for that. But I would just say, why not both? We've got the ability to do both, and give as you're supposed to give in life, and if you feel led to do it, then give a consideration for a planned gift, through your estate when you pass away.
I'm reminded, I think, of the parable of the servants who were all given talents and told coins and told it to take care of them while the master was gone.
Yeah.
And the first one brought it back and said, here, I brought tenfold back. And he was rewarded for it. Another one brought it back 5. He was rewarded his level. And the one guy said, well, I buried mine. Here's your talent back.
Right.
And he was chastised because he didn't increase the fold. And obviously that's probably as much a story about what we do as far as the word of Christ and spreading it to other people. But it could easily just as be really about sometimes how we approach our stewardship in the church, and things like this as ways to help fund the future of the church now, and making sure that it continues.
Oh, exactly. I meet with people every week that they've got money in CDs. CDs right now are paying, on next to nothing, like 0.2% or something like that. That's almost like burying your talent. And I often think about that parable. It's like, yeah, it's just, stick it under the mattress, basically. Talk to me or talk to somebody like me who could help you and make some recommendations of ways you might can grow those talents.
Yeah. And so, that's always things you've got to think about. But when you think about the church, don't always think about what the church needs right now. Think about what the church needs, in 5, 10, 15 years. And those are the churches that grow. We had one reverend that always said, if you're not growing, you're dying.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth to that. So,
yep, that's true. And I want to say, if you are considering, starting an endowment, just talk to other people who've been down that road. I want to, Buncombe Street United Methodist Church was very instrumental in helping me when we were getting ours going, talking to the guy who got theirs off the ground. And so if I could ever help anybody who's going through this with their church, I would love to pay it forward. And so, yeah, talk to people who've been down that road and can help you with that. And we still got miles to go, but we're better off than we were when we started.
Right. Anything else you want to bring up? We had some others we could talk about, but I think we kind of already hit them in other things. We could do maybe a simple example of, say somebody had a house they sold is part of their estate planning. It was sold after all the fees and everything, 100,000, 5% distribution. Obviously, that's pretty simple to figure out.
Yeah.
Anything else along those lines you think we need to talk about concerning these type of investments for ministry in general?
Sure. Well, worth pointing out that great gifts or highly appreciated stocks or investments that if you sold them, you're going to pay some pretty large capital gains tax on. You can gift those to the church. The church can sell them and pay nothing. You get the full tax deduction, and you avoid any of the taxes that would have come your way otherwise. So that's a great thing to do. One neat thing people can do, life insurance is always a great gift. You can purchase a policy. Actually, you can put it in the name of the church. The church can be the owner. You are the insured and the payer on that policy. And you can schedule it where you're paid up in a number of years, like 10 years or 20 years, and your premium payments are tax deductible. And then the church is going to get a magnified gift when you pass away at some point down the road. So that's a strategy that we have, kind of kicked around before. We hadn't had anybody do it yet that we know of, but it's out there, and it's a great way to magnify a gift. Looking forward to growing that as we go, and really excited about the endowment and what it's going to do in the future, and that it'll be there forever.
Great. Well, Bart, thank you for your time. And I'm sure if anybody wants to get in touch with you, you'll be happy to talk to them about setting up an endowment, things of that nature. And I'll put your information in the show notes for the podcast and everything, so people can contact you. But again, thank you for your time.
You're welcome, Steve. Thanks for all you do.
All right. Have a good day.
All right. You too.